This is the Cliffs of Arbel. Not to be confused with the Cliffs of Insanity, but it's really quite a place. It drops down about 1,200 feet, almost straight down behind my back here. This is a place that's very, very historical, as we've already been talking about earlier, where Josephus, while he was still a Jewish general, fortified this cliff against the Romans. Unfortunately, it didn't hold. Josephus eventually was captured by the Romans and survived because he told Vespasian, someday you're going to be Caesar, and that got Vespasian's attention, and he didn't want to kill his good luck charm if it were true. But in the meantime, as he fortified the cliffs, the Great Revolt, of course, was going on here in Galilee, and there were people living inside of caves just down the side of these cliffs. They'd have to use rope ladders or ropes to get down there, and then they'd hide in the cliffs. Of course, the Romans, who were good at destroying just about everything and anything, managed to get to these caves, and you'll get a chance to explore them another time. But they killed everybody inside. It was just a bloodbath up here. There's really no place that you can go in Israel where you didn't have spilled blood. As I mentioned before, the Holy Land is only holy not because of the blood spilt here, but because of the people who lived here and the people who walked here, not the least of which, of course, and the greatest of which is obviously Jesus. So here's what I wanted to show you from up here. You're going to be taking courses here in the life of Messiah. Now, this will not interfere with your course, but it's going to add something to it because you have this tremendous view of the Sea of Galilee. Now, here, looking over the cliffs and looking down, you see the arc of the northern reaches of the Sea of Galilee right here. This is the north edge, which means from this edge right down here off the view that you can't see is Magdala. Magdala is now being excavated, but in the old days, back in the time of Jesus, there were 3 cities that were considered major cities in this part of Galilee. The 3 cities were Sepphoris, which was destroyed by Herod Archelaus and rebuilt by Herod Antipas, a major cosmopolitan city that was sort of a combination of Greeks and Romans and Jews and all kinds of people because it was right on the Via Maris. It became a major economic and trade center. And then you had Tiberias, which is down this way, just a couple of miles, right over there. And of course, it's the largest city in Galilee, right in this area of Galilee, on the Sea of Galilee now, with about, 55 or 60,000 people living in it, maybe more by now. And that existed at the time of Jesus as well, though we don't have really much mention of it in the New Testament. The third location, however, is right off the cliff down here, and that's Magdala. And Magdala was not a little fishing village. It was actually a small city down in those days, and their main industry was really not fishing, but drying fish and then exporting it all over the region, which may explain something very interesting. This is how John the Apostle may have gotten to know the high priest's family in Jerusalem, because if you remember, on the night Jesus was betrayed and everybody deserted him, John followed at a distance, and he and Peter actually entered the high priest's courtyard to see what was going on in the middle of the night to Jesus when they had taken him prisoner, because he was acquainted with the high priest's family and they knew him. So it could be that John the fisherman actually was involved in selling dried fish, perhaps, to those in Jerusalem, including the high priest's family. It's speculation, but it seems to make sense, and it's kind of the best idea anybody has at the moment. But here's the big deal. What you're looking at when you see this arc of northern Galilee right here, just along the lake, with Magdala down here, then you have Gennesaret, Capernaum, Bethsaida, across the Jordan River, where the Jordan River comes into the lake. From this edge of the lake on, for about 1 mile to 2 miles in, all around here, Jesus, Son of God, God incarnate, God with us, did about 80% of his ministry and most of his miracles right in this little swath of land right here. And the world is just never recovered from it. In this little tiny area. That just amazes me when you look at it, because what could be done here that would change the world? The answer is everything. So I want to tell you about just a scenario that happened that will kind of make sense out of one of the most controversial portions of Scripture. Jesus was in the area of Capernaum. When you drove over here, you passed through it, but it's on the northern edge of the lake, right about in the middle of that arc right there. Again, it's hazy, but it was right over there. It's right on the shore. It definitely was a major fishing village at the time. Jesus is in that vicinity when he learns of the death of John the Baptist. John the Baptist was Jesus' good friend. He was also a relative. Don't forget that. And John the Baptist was murdered by Herod Antipas way down the Jordan River Valley across the Dead Sea on the Jordanian side in a place called Macarius. When he learns of John's murder, he also learns something else. Herod Antipas, who killed him, wants to talk to Jesus now. Jesus isn't afraid of anyone, but he also knows that he is not appointed to die under somebody like Herod Antipas, but it's going to be a different set of circumstances altogether, even though Antipas plays a slight role in it. So Jesus, rather than being subjected to Herod Antipas's inquisition, perhaps from messengers, perhaps they want to take him to see him, who knows, Jesus goes east from Capernaum over to the area of Bethsaida. It's important because he crossed the Jordan River. That means he left Herod Antipas's jurisdiction and he went into Herod Philip's jurisdiction. A whole other jurisdiction. Herod Antipas, for the moment, can't touch him. And he's hoping Herod Antipas might lose interest in the meantime. So as Jesus is over in the area of Bethsaida, he's ministering to the people. He sees huge crowds coming to him. I mean, we're talking tens of thousands of people. They only numbered it by the men, though. So as he's over there ministering to the people, he had compassion on them. Remember, the Lord, the compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness, giving love to the 1000th generation, forgiving wickedness, rebellion, and sin. That's how God described himself to Moses, remember? And now, Jesus said, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. So the first thing he does is when he sees the masses, he needs a day of rest. He needs a break. He has compassion on them. Also, there's a very important thing to remember. At that time, John tells us that when he's with those people, it's at the time of the Passover. Jesus is not in Jerusalem, and yet it's at the time of the Passover, and he's up here in Galilee. So he crosses over the Jordan River. Here's all these gazillions of people. He has compassion on them. He speaks to them. He heals them. He cleanses the lepers and so forth. And then it's the end of the day, and everybody's hungry. And all the bakeries are shut down because bakeries bake in the morning. So he looks at Philip to test him. Philip, not the evangelist, but Philip the apostle, who came from Bethsaida on the other side of the Jordan. And he said, where can we get food to feed all these people? Philip's reaction, I'm going to paraphrase, is, are you crazy, Master? Where are we going to get that much food? And besides, it would take a year's wages to buy it all. And the bakeries are closed. What are you talking about? But Jesus was getting Philip to put faith in him. And so Jesus says, gather everybody together, sit them down in groups, and we're going to feed them. And then Jesus miraculously feeds the 5,000 with loaves and fishes, famously, of course, originally offered by a little boy who brought his lunch with him. So he multiplies the bread, he multiplies the fish, everybody eats until they are full. And then you got to remember, people aren't going to be leaving scraps laying around or put them in trash cans. The Jews never threw bread away. They always, again, they take it with them. They'd give it to the poor, whatever it was. And the apostles were sent out with baskets to gather up 12 baskets full of bread, not because that's how many they expected to get, that's what they ended up getting, which tells you the people not only ate till they were full, they took all the scraps with them, and they still couldn't carry all the scraps. So the scraps that were left laying around, it was almost sacrilegious to do that, but they couldn't carry it all, which shows you the magnitude of the miracle. Because he not only fed 5,000 men, but it says plus their wives and their children that day. So you could add that up to at least 20,000 people that he fed way over there in the haze over by Bethsaida. Now that he's there, he's done the great miracle. It's the end of the day. It's close to Passover. And the people now want to do exactly what the apostles wanted to do, except they wanted to take the initiative. We're going to make him king. We're going to elevate. He's the Messiah. He's the king we've been waiting for. There had been many messiahs up here in Galilee, and all of their little reigns had ended in violence because they came to become kings and throw out the Romans and raise the sword, and every one of them ended up getting killed along with their followers, mostly crucified. Jesus is, remember, he's coming back as king. He's here this time to serve and to save that which is lost. That's his mission. And he's staying on mission. That's always the best thing to do with the Lord, is stay on mission. So They want to make him king. So what he does is this. He takes his 12 disciples and he says, go down to the boat, get in the water, and go to, and he didn't say specifically in John where to go to, but we find out in Luke's gospel, go to Gennesaret. Or sorry, it might be Matthew's. Anyway, wherever it is, it says go to Gennesaret. So this is where they're headed. Now, as you look at the coastline here, Bethsaida is way over there. Gennesaret is right here where it's flat and begins to climb back up again. There's a tell there, Tell Gennesaret. It hasn't been excavated yet, but it has been identified. Another fishing village on a high mound right there. So the disciples are told to get in a boat at the end of the day, go from Bethsaida way over here along the shore. Now they're out from the shore a little ways, but they're following the shore of the Sea of Galilee and they're supposed to go to Gennesaret. They get out in the water. Meanwhile, Jesus goes back up into the hills, so he's in the lower parts of the Golden Heights. And he's there just to get away from the people, to mourn for John the Baptist's death. Remember, he has all this compassion on other people while he's still grieving deeply because of John's death. Yet Jesus, he's God in human form. But remember, God has feelings and God hates death worse than you do, worse than anyone ever did. Or why would Jesus come to die for us? I mean, think about it. So the night begins to pass. This valley right down here is known as the Valley of the Doves. It goes all the way out in the direction towards the ocean. This area here, where we're standing right now, is just about 600 feet above sea level, maybe a little bit more than that on the location we're at, which means that all of this is over 700 feet below sea level. Now, I got to give you a little weather lesson here. If the barometric pressure changes in this area and it drops, then it acts like a vacuum cleaner and it sucks the cool air in from the ocean. It comes down the Valley of the Doves right here like a hurricane. And it churns up the Sea of Galilee, which is shallow. The Sea of Galilee is nothing more than a wide spot in the Jordan River. It's 13 miles long, about 6 miles wide at its widest point, and it's only about 150 feet deep. It's not like Lake Tahoe in Northern California, roughly the same shape, but Lake Tahoe's much, much bigger and it's very, very deep. This is just a little shallow pan of water. So when the wind comes through, it churns it up violently. So you can get some big waves out there, up to 4 to 6 feet on the worst days. Well, the boat is coming towards the wind. The wind churns up at night. The guys are out in the boat in the storm. They're terrified. They're fishermen. Yeah, they're supposed to be out on boats all the time, but not in a storm. You don't put out in a storm like that. I've been out in one of the big tourist boats out here when there were 1 to 2 foot waves out in the Sea of Galilee, and the big tourist boat was bobbing around like a cork, so much so that water was actually splashing inside the boat where the gangplank would go. It was incredible. So they're coming along here in a much smaller boat, and suddenly the storm churns up, and they're really afraid they're going to go down. It's the middle of the night. It's at Passover, don't forget. Now there's a very interesting thing that happens at Passover. Passover is timed with full moons. How did they see Jesus walking on water when Jesus now comes to them walking on the lake during a storm? Because that's what happened. Jesus went up in the hills, they went out on the lake. A storm hits. They're getting not only pushed back, they're getting tossed around, and it's horrible. And Jesus comes walking from Bethsaida right along the water, right here towards the boat, wherever it was out there. And they can see him. The assumption is, well, he glowed in the dark. Really? The only time that we ever know that Jesus actually probably physically glowed while he was here with his disciples was up on the slopes of Mount Hermon, presumably there, where the Transfiguration took place, when he ended up shining. You know, that was a time where he glowed. But you see, if he's out here and the sky is clear because this windstorm doesn't require clouds or thunderheads or anything, that he's out in the lake and they can see him in a full moon. And here he comes walking on the water and they're terrified and they think that he's a ghost. Of course, he says, fear not, don't be afraid. It's just me. It's okay. It's I. It's fine. Of course, Peter, being Peter, says, if that's really you, tell me to get out of the boat and walk to you. And you know the story. Jesus says, get out of the boat. Now, I have a theory about this. It's only my theory. It's nobody else's. So if you don't like it, it's fine. But I've been out on a boat when it's been very, very rocky. I told you that. So waves are breaking and water coming in the boat. And I realized that it was almost impossible to stand. And in a much smaller boat, it's going to be a lot worse. It's possible that Peter had to crawl out of the boat in order to stand up because it's that bad. So he gets out of the boat, he begins to walk towards Jesus. Suddenly he realizes, what am I doing? And he goes down. Jesus rescues him. You remember the story. I won't go into additional detail on that. And they step back in the boat. And when Jesus gets back in the boat with Peter, it says that they, implying definitely pointing to one, they miraculously arrived at their destination, Gennesaret, right down there. So they went from Bethsaida that night to Gennesaret. They get out of the boat. Now Jesus is spotted first thing in the morning. The crowds immediately begin to erupt because they were originally across the Jordan over there when he was there. I mean, he gathers the crowds from all over the region. So they come piling in on him, a huge mass of people right here at Gennesaret, and he makes his way back to Capernaum. But while he's here at Gennesaret, what does he do? He's been up all night. He's been walking on water. He's been mourning for John the Baptist. He just fed 20,000 people the day before, and ministering to them all day during this time. And what does he do when he gets to Gennesaret? Hey guys, give me a break. I'm really tired here. No! He continues to have compassion on them. And all the masses that came to him between the time he got from Gennesaret to Capernaum that day, their people are crowding him. He's healing them. He's doing miracles. He's blessing them. He's teaching them until he finally gets back to his hometown, here in Galilee anyway, Capernaum, which is right there about in the middle between Bethsaida and Gennesaret. When he gets to Capernaum, he goes into the synagogue. When he goes into the synagogue, he begins to teach the people. And it's John chapter 6. Now that's an incredibly long chapter. I'm certainly not going to read it, but if you're hearing this study, of course, you need to go read it yourself. It's one of the most mysterious and kind of gory chapters in the New Testament, only because of the implication Jesus gives, where he says, unless you eat my flesh and drink my blood, you're not going to be saved. And of course, people thought that was a really horrible thing. The Greeks, when they heard it, they immediately assumed that Jesus was talking about cannibalism or something worse. But yet, what did Jesus do the day before? The day before. See, this is a lesson in context. We read the Bible as if it's in little proverbial sound bites. Instead, you have to knock out the chapter breaks and read entire contexts, or even where there are paragraph breaks, like in my Bible, where here it says right there, a paragraph break, Jesus walks on water, and then Jesus, the bread of life. And you read that and know this is a new section. It's not, it's the same story. It's the same account. And so, the very day before, he fed 5,000 people, plus their wives, plus their children, plus a huge excess, and now he goes into the synagogue and he tells them, you want more? Because why had they come? Why had all those people gathered? Well, they all wanted something from him. Jesus, being God, being the God of all grace, is always giving. What does he need? He doesn't need anything. He wants you. He wants us. So he gives to get us. So he goes into the synagogue, and while he's in there, he sits down and he says, in light of what happened the day before, they ate till they were stuffed, they were completely full, and they couldn't even carry all the scraps away. He said, you ate. Now I want you to remember that I am the bread of life. Your ancestors ate manna in the wilderness, but they died. This is the bread that comes down from heaven, that one may eat of it and not die. I'm the living bread that came down from heaven. Whoever eats this bread will live forever. And the bread that I shall give is my flesh, which I shall give for the life of the world. I am the bread of life. Now, remember what we had been talking about before. People will say, what does it mean? Before you ask what it means, ask what it does. Ask what it's for. What does bread do? It fills you. It nourishes you. It's the staple of your life. And Jesus refers to the Jewish people wandering in the wilderness as the Hebrews under Moses before they came into the promised land for 40 years. God gave them the bread from heaven, as it's called, that miraculous manna. They ate a miracle from heaven, miracle bread, and it kept them alive. Yes, people lived, but they also died in the wilderness. and yet they survived because they had the manna of heaven. He said, your ancestors ate manna from heaven, but they died. This is the bread that comes down from heaven. You eat this bread, you won't die. He said, that bread is me. And he wasn't talking about eating his flesh, even though that was the terminology that he used. He wasn't talking about cannibalism. And unfortunately for some, you might find offense at this, but it's true. He wasn't talking about transubstantiation either. He was talking about, you need me. That bread that you ate yesterday, and you ate till you were full and you went home satisfied, you couldn't even carry all the scraps. It's that abundant. I'm going to be that to your salvation. And the Pharisees got it, because even when you look over in John chapter 6, when he's talking about this, the Jews began to argue sharply among themselves. How can this man give his flesh to eat? They weren't getting it. Before then, Jesus said, stop murmuring among yourselves. No one can come to me unless the Father who sent draws him, and I will raise him up on the last day. Before that, I'm backing up. He said, is this not Jesus, the son of Joseph, the Pharisees said, whose father and mother we know? How can he say, I came down from heaven? See, they're missing the point. They're missing the point. He said, that bread you ate yesterday, I'm like that bread, except you take me. And unlike even your ancestors eating the miraculous bread in the wilderness, you'll never die. And then you go and read the rest of the chapter, and suddenly his message is so simple that the peasants could get it. And at the end of the message, most of his disciples left. Remember, they took off. They said, this is a hard teaching. Who can accept it? The question is, why did they do that? Is it that they didn't understand it? Many may not have understood it. But I think the other portion of it was, you mean he's not going to give us any more food? We came to get lunch, and he's not going to do it again. He's saying, I got to take him. We're out of here. Remember, we take Jesus for what he can give to us. Jesus only gave to us. And he said, you follow me. Folks, when you look at the life of Jesus and God and what he did through all of the Bible from Genesis to Revelation, God is a God who gives. And he expects his followers to be giving people, not people that feel entitled to things from God, entitled to blessings from God, but will accept those when God gives them. But in the meantime, we are here to give ourselves and the salvation of God to others, just the way Jesus did. Very, very important place to be standing here and looking at the entire New Testament scene in Galilee right here in this one arch. Now, there's one other thing I want to tell you before we just kind of break up and you can go take a look around. And that is that when we leave from here, we're going to go up to Tel Hatzor, or you might have read it in the Bible, Tel Hazor. And that's up in this direction over here. It follows the Jordan River Valley uphill from the Sea of Galilee, and there's a saddle up there that leads into an area known as the Hula Valley. Kiryat Shimona is up there. There used to be another lake up there that was a malarial-infested swamp. But on this side of that lake, there was this huge, huge city, one of the biggest cities in the entire region, stretching all the way to Babylon and all the way to Egypt. It was huge, and it was a fortress city. And we'll talk about that when we get there. But what's fascinating in that city is that when Joshua comes in to the Promised Land, the first city that's conquered with God's miraculous help is Jericho. The second city that's conquered is Ai, or I, however you want to spell it. The letters Ai is how it's spelled. And that's uphill from Jericho, and it's way down that direction. But the third city that he conquered was Hatzor. He went all the way up there to conquer it. But before he could do that, the king of Hatzor realized there's a guy coming into the land with an army, and they've been miraculously wiping out cities. They got the first two. Word gets to him, we got to stop this guy before he starts. And so as you read over in Joshua chapter 11, that Joshua, as he's preparing to go up north, this king in Hatzor gathers together all the tribal heads and kings of all the different people here, including Hittites Jebusites, too many names to remember, but all these people, and they gather together an enormous army. And Joshua has to fight them off before he gets to Hatzor. So not battling over a city, but battling armies from various cities and various areas, he engages in a massive battle with the people that aren't even very good fighters, even though Joshua was a great general. And as he engages in this battle, he wins hands down. God gives them the miracle. He says, if you come into the land and you do what I say, I will give you the victories. And here's a miraculous victory. Here's the question though. Where did that take place? Are you ready?
Yes.
Right here. This area right in here. This mound over here in this direction is called the Horns of Hatim. This is where, infamously and famously, if you like, where the Crusaders had taken refuge from Salah ad-Din and all of his army, which surrounded them on that peak up there, known as the Horns of Hatim, back in, 1197, I guess it was, or something like that, AD, not BC, but AD. And of course, that was the biggest disaster that ever confronted the Crusaders up in that area. They lost the true cross, which was just a piece of wood, but they said it was the true cross. It was their holiest relic, and they lost it up there. And almost to a man, they were completely wiped out by Salah ad-Din's army. That happened up there. But from that spot, and there was a spring on the other side, the spring of Meron, it was on the other side, that was known as the waters of Meron. And this is where Joshua came and engaged these armies in this gigantic battlefield right here, which the reason I'm pointing it out is this will take us to our next destination, which is Tel Hatzor, where we have even more to say about that. So fascinating place to be. New Testament, Old Testament, Joshua, right up there. Amazing place. I hope you enjoyed the study. And again, take notes if you can, but read John chapter 6 for all of this, Joshua for that. It's amazing. God bless you guys, and come to Israel. You'll love it.